Hello, and welcome to today's program in honor of White Armband Day. My name is Fatima Delic. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Congress of Bosniaks of North America. I'm originally from Glogova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, near the city of Bratunac. I moved to the United States at the age of 5 after my family was expelled as a result of the genocide committed by Bosnian Serb forces in Bosnia. I'm part of the next generation of survivors, the generation born after the genocide, those whose lives are impacted by these events, even though we did not bear witness to them firsthand. It is because of this that I'm so honored to moderate this educational event today. White Armband Day, which takes place each year on the 31st of May, serves to remember the victims of the genocide committed in the town of Prijedor, located in northern Bosnia. Just over 50 years after the Nazis forced Jews to wear the Star of David, the othering was repeated in Bosnia, where another ethnic group was branded for extermination. After taking over the local government by force, Bosnian Serb authorities issued a decree ordering all non-Serb citizens to mark their houses with white flags or bed sheets and to wear white armbands when leaving their homes. This was the beginning of the campaign of extermination of the non-Serb population in Prijedor. The terror didn't end with the branding, however. Concentration and rape camps were established where mass executions took place. 3,173 people were killed in Prijedor. Almost 31,000 people were detained in prison camps, and 53,000 were expelled from their homes. And yet, to this day, local authorities in Prijedor refuse to permit the construction of a memorial for the innocent victims. Even more disturbing is the sheer ignorance displayed by certain politicians in Republika Srpska who deny the events ever took place. Many choose to wear a white armband on the 31st of May each year, and they use this symbol to stand for justice and truth in solidarity with the victims of human rights abuses in Prijedor and around the globe. We are hoping to use this event today to spread information on what happened during the horrible time and to shed light on what survival and struggle for justice looks like today. I'd like to welcome our panelists who join us today to discuss this very important topic. First with us is Jordan Stevens Scher, a former social worker and teacher. Jordan's first book, Our Neighbors, Their Voices, True Stories of Immigrant Exodus, chronicles the stories of various immigrant groups who've migrated to the US. It was published in 2019. While writing his first book, Jordan met and was inspired by the life stories of survivors of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. His current book, And Still We Rise, a novel about the genocide in Bosnia, is based on the life stories of those survivors and has been dedicated to giving voice to truth about the genocide in Bosnia, specifically in Prijedor and its aftermath. Jordan has been a guest speaker on numerous podcasts and has presented to many groups and organizations about his work. Jordan is a member of the Working Group for Bosnia and Herzegovina and a member of the Institute for Research on Genocide Canada. He is also a board member of the Bosnian American Community Association in Utica, New York. He lives in Northern California with his wife, Pina, and they have 2 adult children living their best lives. Also joining us, we have Mirsad Čaušević. Mirsad is from Hambarine, which is part of the Prijedor municipality in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He spent 5 months in 2 different Serb-run concentration camps in 1992. Based on those experiences, Mirsad wrote his memoir, Death in the White House, which was published in 2016. Mirsad lost 2 brothers to the genocide in Bosnia. After moving to Chicago in July of 1993, he found ways to convert his trauma into activism. To this day, Mirsad is actively engaged in local and Bosnian nonprofit organizations and is a member of the Institute for Research Canada, the Working Group for B, and is a member of the exhibit committee of the Illinois Holocaust Museum in Skokie. His success as a business owner has allowed him to contribute to many causes that support peace and justice in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And last but not least, we have Dr. David Pettigrew joining us today. Dr. Pettigrew is a professor of philosophy at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, Connecticut, where he also created and teaches a course on Holocaust and genocide studies. Dr. Pettigrew serves as a member of the steering committee of the Yale University Genocide Studies program. He lectures and writes about the genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina to raise awareness, resist denial, and to ensure that those victims will not be forgotten. Thank you all for being a part of our discussion today. Each of you relate to these events in unique ways, either through personal, academic, or work experience, or a combination of all three. So we'll start with giving you the opportunity to introduce your work and give us some thoughts on the importance of White Armband Day. And then we will circle back to the question and answer portion of our program. So Jordan, we will start with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Fatima, and thank you to Congress of Bosniaks in North America for having this and having the panel. I'm going to be just reading a synopsis of my book. As Fatima mentioned, I had met two women who were children at the time during the war, one from Bosanski Novi and the other from Donji Vakuf. I honestly was pretty naive to what had gone on in Bosnia in the early 90s. I'm not naive anymore. Did a lot of reading and research and eventually came around to wanting to write a novel because I did not have the lived experience, firsthand experience, but I wanted to write a novel about what happened in Prijedor because it is not well known at all. So I'm going to read a synopsis of the book, and I hope it intrigues those of you out there to want to get the book and read it. Based on real life events in the spring of 1992 in Prijedor, a Bosniak family, the Kovačevićes, is confronted with the harsh reality that they are targets of a brutal campaign to rid the country of non-Serbs. Neighbors turn on neighbors as the nationalist Serb propaganda leads to the so-called ethnic cleansing of communities that destroys families and their homes. Elvir and his 15-year-old son Amir are sent to the Omarska concentration camp, where torture and death haunt them daily. With a world that turns a blind eye, both suffer physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Yet they must rely upon each other if they are to survive. Hira, Elvir's wife, and mother of their two younger children, Halima and Danis, are imprisoned in another camp in Ternopilje. They too must survive the atrocities that visit them, including rape and witnessing beatings and murder. Hira and the children encounter Elvir's brother, Tariq, who has been transferred to Ternopilje from another camp, Karaterm, only to see him disappear a short time later. As they all have learned too well in the camps, many disappear, never to return. The Kovačevićes eventually leave the camps and reconnect with Tariq's wife, Merhem, and her two young daughters. Merhem is unable to accept the possibility of the loss of her husband. The family's trajectories lead them to journey together as they face unforeseen obstacles that must be overcome if they're to find true freedom from the trauma that continues to inform their decisions. As refugees, they move to Croatia, then Germany, and finally to America, seeking to rediscover meaning in their lives after surviving genocide, grieving their losses, and to place roots in their new home. So part of the story, and it really, and Mirso certainly will be able to, to discuss this, but it is hard hitting to understand what happened in the concentration camps. I think certainly we know, many of us know about concentration camps during the Holocaust, but not that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there were many, many concentration camps. I guess what occurred in the camps in Prijedor need to be told. Fatima had said earlier, we want to give voice to truth, and that's the goal of my writing. So as hard hitting as the story is, it is truthful to discuss what happened in the camps. It's also important, and the characters in my book do follow through on this, to show the resilience. Many people that I have spoken with who survived the war, survived the genocide, always had hope. It could be diminished and minimized, but there was always hope. And as testament to where I know many people now in the diaspora, to where people are now in the diaspora, it speaks to their resilience. And in the book that I wrote, it's interesting, the cover is actually sort of a picture, I guess, a drawing of a town or a village in the background in hills. But in the front, there are flowers. And I remember talking to the art director for the publisher, and at first the flowers were wilted. And we talked about it, and I said, I really want to see those flowers upright, because it really has to speak to the hope and the promise, despite the denial that goes on in RS and Serbia and other places. We really need to speak to the promise. And the characters in my book do figure it out. But the trauma certainly is ever present as they move forward in their lives.
Thank you very much, Jordan, for that. I would like to have Mirsad speak a little bit about his work and share with us a reflection on what White Armband Day means to him.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Goddess Bosnia, for organizing and having this event. Yeah, I am from Prijedor, and what I witnessed, I wrote in the book Death in the White House, and that I think I'm going to try to shortly explain quickly what kind of trauma and terrible, horrifying events I witnessed, and many people did not make that. So what this White Armband means for us is to, this is the reason why we're doing this event, and obviously we need to continue to remember and make sure that this never happens. We are bringing awareness every year throughout the world, and you know, even though this is not the beginning of the genocide that happened in Prijedor, many terrible things happened after that. You know, concentration camps, burning the villages, and ethnic cleansing, and women raped, and so on. So I will just tell you what I witnessed in the camp. And you know, I'm from Hamvarnem, which is a little village, biggest village actually next to Prijedor, that was attacked by Serbian forces May 22nd. And we lived in the forest for 7 days as a refugee there, and then we end up in the neighborhood a village called Rizvanovići. That's where I stayed for 2 months, and then meanwhile Serb forces destroyed Armband and burned every house. And then they came on July 20th with a big force and separated men from children and women, and then took us to concentration camp. I don't know if I could call myself lucky, because so many people were killed at that spot, like around 1,500 people estimated killed that day during that ethnic cleansing. So on the way to the concentration camp, they loaded us in the buses. They overloaded the buses. We could not even sit, and we were sitting on the floors, and we had to sing Chetnik songs and lift the 3 fingers, and they would then jump over us and try to hit us on those fingers and over our heads. And that's how we made it to Omarska. And when we arrived, they lined us up against the White House, which is a little house that was painted white. That's why they called it White House. And I remember that it was just hard to describe the screaming from the pain, people screaming from the pain, and smell of the dead, smell of the alcohol, of sweat. And it was a summer warm day. Those guards were beating me. They were hitting me on the kidney several times, and then when I started screaming from the pain, they started hitting a second hit kidney. When I fell down, they hit me in my face, and I remember I woke up in that White House full of people, bloody, scared, scary looking. And then at this almost exactly same moment, some naked guy ran out of the house, White House, it was all black from bruisings and beatings. And he was screaming like just for his life, like an animal. And they shoot him there in front of us. That was a terrible moment that I will never forget. And that night, nobody, they actually pulled 3 or 4 people from that White House and killed them in front of us and shoot them to death. So then nobody would like to sit in front. Everybody moved back and we accepted each other. It was terribly warm, no air, we could not breathe. People were passing out, and some people had to go to the bathroom. They could not go out, so they used their shoe. Next day, when we came out running to the bathroom, I saw some weird-looking people, very scary, with a long beard and ripped clothing, and I thought, how can somebody look like that? But there were people from Kozarac who were brought in the camp on May 24th, so almost 2 months prior to my arrival. Fortunately, I looked, and we all looked like them just a couple of weeks later. So I tried to just, the many terrible events and killings happened in Omarska, and then there's an estimated number, I think, between 700 and 800 people got killed in that camp. But I will describe my own experience, and I was beaten there 3 times. First time when my arrival, second time when we had to go to investigation, and then third time when I went to pick up the water for us. Yeah, so I'll explain that. One night just before I asked for the go to get the water, my neighbor asked around 1 o'clock in the morning to go get some water, and the guard pulled him out and beat him to death. And his son, a 16-year-old, was just there watching from that room. And next night, unconsciously, I asked to go get the water. And so when he said, let's go, then when I came out, I realized I made a huge mistake. So on the way to the bathroom, I had to go through the guards, and they stopped us and they started beating me up. And I intentionally just to try to protect myself by reflex, and went there, got the bucket of water. I think I drank 10 gallons of water, and on the way back again, they tried to beat me up, but somehow this guard was in good mood, and he stopped him. He said, "Let him go." And next day, actually, on the way back from lunch, we had to run for the lunch. I was eating the bread and running, slice of bread. When they stopped me and said, "Hey, you stop back, come back here, you," and I looked around, and I'm making sure they're calling me. Yes, he's the one. You're the one who made me hurt my leg last night or arm because you were fighting me. So they put me against the wall and they start beating me up. There was a piece of school table with the chains, with the police batons, and I was hitting with my head into the wall. And I had that bread in my throat. I could not swallow. So I couldn't even breathe, and I thought, I'm dead. I couldn't, I was bleeding in the back. They were hitting me so much on my back. And then, they asked me a question, which I have to remember and tell people, am I married? And obviously I was not married, but, the instinct of survival kicked in, I guess. And I thought if I tell them I have a wife and kids, then maybe they will sorrow for me. So I said, yeah, I'm married and I have 2 kids. And then he started laughing. And why did you get married? He asked me how old I am. And I said, 23. And he said, why did you get married before me? And started hitting me up again. And then there was some lady in uniform that intervened and said, enough, let him go. I guess she felt maybe she was murdered, that, that hurts her. And then they let me go. So those are events that I was beating up, but, because we don't have a time, everything is in that book. I would also say just how when International Red Cross and British journalist Ed Williami discovered this camp, they moved us from that camp to another camp, Manjača, and kept there maybe 180 people in better shape and shaved them, washed them, and they gave them good clothes and food and beds so they could show the world this is not the camp. And I would also say a little bit about Manjača, because when we arrived to Manjača, there was almost dark, so the commander of the camp would not let us in till next morning. And then that night they pulled 9 people and shot them to death. And next morning, we were so dehydrated. It was summer day. They lined us up in line of 10, and we had to knee on our knees and our elbows and our heads down, just like pray like God. And the order was, if somebody just makes a little move, it will be shot. So it was hard to stay there still, and a lot of people just passed out, and because they get the cramps and the bodies were so skinny. And then when they brought us in the camp, it took almost all day, and the commander ordered us to drink as much as we can, water, and they brought the water from the nearby lake that they used to exercise, military exercises, and the lake was full of oil tank and bugs, but anyway, nobody was paying attention that day. I think I drank so much water that day, that moment, that the body was not able to reacted very weird to me at that point, and everything I drank came out through my skin, big drops like a rain. So a couple days later, International Red Cross came and they registered us so they could not kill us anymore. But this, we were slept on the concrete, and there were kept cows prior to our arrival there. There were like the big barns. We were so scared, hungry, thirsty, and then International Red Cross started bringing the food every 2 weeks and pack of cigarettes. And then those cigarettes became like a gold. We could buy a hand of salt or half of onion or extra spoon of soup, and that's how we survived. And some people actually sold their clothing for cigarettes just to gain on the weight. So the trauma there continued. We had to work hard. We had to go to forest, cut the wood. It was so hard to go down steep hill even without a log of wood, but then to come back, it was almost impossible, but we did it. And that's the work we had to do. Some people went to farms, and then the day of release came. Even prior to that, we were always gossiping, finding the ways to survive and hope that we get free soon. December 18th, that's when I was released, and then the joy of that freedom, it's hard to describe. We were kissing the ground when we arrived to Croatia and hugging each other. We were singing, crying, and that was our another birth. That's we now celebrate like a second birthday. But my life, was full of shocks. This I didn't realize that this is just the beginning for me. Unfortunately, when I arrived there in Karlovac, next day my parents told me they also actually, I met them there after seeing them. I didn't know they were alive, so there was happiness for me. But when they told me my actually oldest brother was killed, which he's still moving, he's still missing. That was a shock for me that I don't remember very well, but they said I was sitting in the corner staring in the walls, and doctors and my family were sitting next to me all this time and trying to steer me back to reality. And then somehow I survived that. And then I had to wait 6 months to get paperwork to get to USA. I brought my parents with me. I didn't want to leave them. And then another shock, it was a culture shock. When we arrived, I didn't speak any English, I didn't know anybody. We were sad and lost. And then the climate, it was so humid and warm. We didn't have an air conditioner, could not breathe now in that bedroom or studio that we got for 3 of us. But a couple of days later, it was another big shock for me. And my sister from Croatia called me that my second brother was killed, a Mesut. So somehow I couldn't tell my parents that he is killed. So I hidden that from them for a year. It was so hard, emotional. And they asked if he's alive, if he's hungry, why he's not calling to find an excuse. And I would go to the bedroom or in the bed or to the lake, actually, and bathroom, or to the lake and cried. And at night I had a big nightmares, that I'm in the camp again. But a year later, my aunt told my mom, and somehow they took that burden for me. but the scream and cry of my parents, I will never forget. And also, thank God I was able to overcome all this pain. I'm still working on this every day, but it took a long time, but I was able to turn my life around and become successful, and also be able to help communities, nonprofit organizations, and helping people, and that's what makes me happy. So that's my story, that's written in the book, Death in the White House. All the proceeds from the book are towards building a monument towards those victims, and that's my biggest goal in my life now, to end up that journey with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mirsad, for sharing your story with us and your reflections. Your resilience is inspiring, and we are so glad that you could join us here today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Dr. Pettigrew, will you please share with us a little bit about your work and your reflections on today?
Thank you. Thank you very much to Selma and Fatima of the Congress of Bosniaks of North America. Thanks to Fatima for the kind introduction. My thanks to Mirsad and Jordan. I'd like to thank Jordan and Mirsad for their books, as they do such important work telling the truth about the genocide. Jordan as an ally and Mirsad as a survivor. And also thanks to Mirsad for his commitment to telling the truth and supporting organizations and activists around the world. So my understanding of White Armband Day is that it was formed in 2012 as a resistance to denial in an effort to tell the truth about the genocide in Prijedor. The White Armband was selected because it had been used to identify non-Serbs for persecution. Organizers of White Armband Day launched a brilliant social media protest to identify, at the time, with supporters wearing white armbands and posting photos on a Facebook page called Stop Genocide Denial. And it was very inspiring. It raised a lot of awareness. Photos were coming in from supporters and refugees from around the world. And the social media campaign received coverage in the Washington Post and continues to spark local White Armband Day actions around the world. And of course, it led to our discussion today. There's an excellent article that explains this history and genesis of White Armband Day by Johanna Paul in the journal Memory Studies. Denial, which is being opposed by White Armband Day, is a betrayal of the truth and an insult to the memory of the victims. But denial has a more sinister consequence. That is to say that in EU jurisprudence, denial of genocide is intrinsically an act of hatred and discrimination, since it minimizes or justifies the barbaric crimes suffered by the targeted group, minimizing not only the crimes, but also the suffering. And in this way, the denial entails a threat that the crime could be repeated. In other words, denial as hate speech is a form of incitement. Denial identifies the group of victims as unworthy of empathy or protection against harm and renders the group of victims vulnerable to a repetition of the atrocities. For these reasons, the European Union Council framework decision of 28 November 2008 directed that all EU member states shall ensure that publicly condoning, denying, or trivializing crimes of genocide is punishable. Hence, former High Representative Insko's decision to implement the law against genocide denial and against the glorification of convicted war criminals was a historic assertion of the rule of law in concert with this EU Council framework decision of 2008, and an important effort to protect survivors from re-traumatization and to prevent a repetition of the atrocities. Of course, such insightful genocide denial has been the official policy of Republika Srpska, where genocide is denied and perpetrators are glorified. Recall that the Russian Federation vetoed a UN Security Council resolution commemorating the Srebrenica genocide in 2015, And the person who voted no, Bijelih Churkin, is honored with a memorial plaque in East Sarajevo. The plaque reads, "Spasibo za Ruskoye Niet." Thanks for the Russian no. When President Biden called for the investigation and prosecution of war crimes committed by Russian forces in Ukraine, Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, rejected Biden's suggestion and took the opportunity to claim that the Srebrenica genocide had been staged, perhaps implying that the scenes of atrocities and mass graves in Bucha were also being staged. This reminds us of the ongoing support of the Russian Federation for Bosnian Serb and Bosnian Croat nationalist efforts to destabilize Bosnia as a sovereign nation. And the ambassador from the Russian Federation to Bosnia has emphasized repeatedly that Bosnia is no more than a collection of entities and is not a single state, and has warned Bosnia against joining the EU or NATO. So, of course, with this support of the Russian Federation and of Serbia, the culture of denial in Republika Srpska has escalated beyond denial to a celebration of the atrocities, or to a stage that Professor Haris Halilovic, himself a former prisoner in Ternopilje, has identified as triumphalism. Such celebrations of the atrocities include a plaque on Vratsa Hill commemorating Ratko Mladic in the very position from which Sarajevo was attacked and over 11,000 citizens were murdered, a bust for Nikola Kojevic in Banja Luka, who was identified in the Karadzic judgment as part of a joint criminal enterprise and one of the 4 core leaders. And in addition to these plaques and statues, there are more pernicious statues to the fighters or defenders of Republika Srpska, or to the people of the cross. Miodrag Živković has created such massive sculptures, which have been erected in Prijedor, where memorials for the victims have been forbidden, and in other cities such as Bijelih, which is dedicated to the fallen Serb fighters, or Brčko, dedicated to the defenders of Brčko. So these massive sculptures by Živković are colonizing the cultural imaginary. In addition to such statues, there have been banners, murals, and posters glorifying Mladic, Šešelj, and others. A mural of Mladic had appeared in Foča, and although the image of Mladic was removed at the insistence of the High Representative, the slogan that glorifies Mladic remains on the opposite side of the street, which reads, "Through fire and storm, your name continues to resonate through Republika Srpska." And it was also last summer that a new mural appeared in Visegrad, an image of Mladic's hat and of Republika Srpska with the slogan, "Your honorable struggle is our eternal freedom." And of course, a poster appeared in Srebrenica last year declaring July 11th, Srebrenica Liberation Day. Hence, White Armband Day reminds us of the need to respond to denial, to resist such perverse celebrations, tell the truth, and establish memorials and memorial ceremonies where they have been denied. Survivors have advocated for a memorial for the victims in Prijedor, at Omarska, Ternopilje, or Karaterm, but Prijedor has not given permission for the memorial, and the owners of Omarska have not given permission. Satko Mujagic indicates that an agreement was reached for a memorial in the White House in Omarska. However, that agreement has been rescinded, and now, as you know, survivors, family members, and supporters are only able to visit the site for several hours for one day each year, August 6th. Unable to establish a permanent memorial, survivors gather for speeches, laying flowers at the White House, and until COVID, they were releasing white balloons with the names of the victims attached. And I've attended the commemoration for the last several years, and it's also important, I think, to point out that the people at the commemoration are surrounded by guards, by uniformed guards who are surveilling and I think re-traumatizing the participants. At Ternopilje, there is a memorial for the perpetrators standing in front of one of the camp buildings that honors those whose lives laid the foundation of Republika Srpska. So the struggle for a memorial at Omarska has inspired efforts to memorialize other atrocity sites. I want to mention briefly, before I conclude, at Barutny Magazine is a concentration camp on the road between Jelic and Kalinovic. The main detention site was the Miladin Radojevic school in Kalinovic, but men were moved from Barutny Magazine prior to being taken to secluded sites along the road to be executed. The human remains of 42 of the victims have still not been identified. Though the school in Kalinovic is now once again repurposed as a school, and the Barutny Magazine site is abandoned. Survivors would like to protect the site and install a national museum, but have been thwarted by the local municipality. While the Victims Association, Istina Kalinovic, has been prevented from installing a mural of Ratko Mladic, somewhat similar to the mural in Belgrade, welcomes visitors today to Kalinovic. Well, I've advocated for the establishment of protected national memorial sites in a letter to the High Representative. First to High Representative Insko, letters that were supported by Mirsad. First to High Representative Insko, and most recently to High Representative Schmidt. I expected support from High Representative Schmidt, since there is a culture of Holocaust remembrance in Germany. But thus far, however, High Representative Schmidt has shown no interest. In the absence of his support, I'm working on organizing an appeal to the UN General Assembly for its support. In January 2022, the UN General Assembly unanimously approved a resolution condemning Holocaust denial and commending member states who preserved Nazi concentration camps as memorial and educational centers to ensure that the crime will not be repeated. Hence, the appeal I'm organizing would ask the UN General Assembly to condemn the denial of genocide and other war crimes in Bosnia, and to advocate for memorials and education sites for the victims at former concentration camps, including Omarska, Ternopilje, Barutny Magazine, and other atrocity sites in Foča and Visegrad. The model of such educational memorial sites, of course, would be Srebrenica Memorial Center, which was established by 4 decisions by 3 successive high representatives. And another model that exists would be the Luka concentration camp in Brčko, where there's a plaque outside the building and a memorial room. In addition to establishing sites at Omarska, Ternopilje, Karaterm, Barutny Magazine, and Foča, and protecting Bjeroniska Street House and Stražica Cemetery, it's become clear recently that Kravica Warehouse, where up to 1,500 victims from Srebrenica were executed and then buried in mass graves, also needs to be protected. Currently, Bratunac is overseeing renovations to the warehouse, renovations that will remove holes caused by shrapnel and bullets. Survivors have stated that in principle, they're not opposed to renovations, but they object to the fact that there is no memorial at the site, even to this day. Once again, on White Armband Day, we dedicate ourselves to resisting denial, telling the truth, and ensuring that the victims will not be forgotten and that genocide will not be repeated. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pettigrew, for your words, for your work, and for your reflection on today. Mirsad, I want to ask you, so we talked about, and Dr. Pettigrew mentioned, that local authorities in Prijedor are refusing to permit the construction of a memorial for innocent victims. And I want to ask you, as a survivor, what would a memorial like this mean to you, and as someone who has lost family members in these atrocities? And is there anything that you can share with us on work being done to make sure that these lives are memorialized?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, David, for your presentation and your work that you have proven that really helps war to understand what really happened in Bosnian war. Yeah, we in Prijedor actually are trying from on board and also from home to put some pressure to local authorities to allow us to build these monuments, and we unfortunately did not get still green light. What is sad from most of this is that even we know that there are 102 children killed in Prijedor, and the parents of these kids are actually a priority in trying to build a monument for years. And if they're able not to approve that just for the kids, that tells you really how much resistance is out there, and still people hate. And for us as victims and survivors of these concentration camps and our families and their families, this memorial would, for all victims, would be huge, and hopefully there will be a place that we will find a closure and remember these people. For me, as a survivor and victim, it feels, and many of us feels like these people never existed if we don't have a memorial for them. So our lives, our job and as a survivors is to, before we are deceased, I mean, while we are alive, we want to see this monument. And we here in Chicago have an organization called Friends of Prijedor that hired Faruk Pirić from Sarajevo, who actually designed Potocari to design a monument for victims in Prijedor, in which we have done that, and we have that material already the last 2 years or 3 years already. And I tried, to contact the local authorities with that to present them that idea, but it was always refused. No, never got the email respond. But here in Chicago, we were able to meet local officials in the city hall of mayor's office, and we were very well accepted and promised that we will be able to accomplish that goal here. But unfortunately, COVID came, and this crisis throughout the world. Now they are removing the monuments throughout the city and throughout the USA. So we are not giving up. We are now trying to figure out again to approach different government officials here, because now there are different officials anyway, and proceed with that. So we could start from here. We want to invest this project into Prijedor where it belongs, but since we are not able to and we are afraid, it will take much longer time, we will start from here, and then hopefully maybe in Sarajevo and Banja Luka, Prijedor, and throughout the world. And this should be the message to new generations that, this was a genocide, this is a crime that should not happen to anybody. And we hope with that monument, we'll finally find some closure. We put the end of this and move look forward for a better life and new generations to learn from it and live in the peace. So also Friends of Prijedor currently is working on building the website that's called Prijedor Virtual Museum, that we will be able to see all the crimes and genocide that happened in Prijedor on one page, which will show mass graves, name of the victims, picture of the victims, cemeteries, prosecuted war criminals, all the events that commemorations that we have throughout the year in Prijedor, and so on. So that website is under construction, will be posted on May 31st. It probably would not be finalized by then, but this is a project that will probably last forever. We'll always have to add some new details, and hopefully that it's also part of us survivors for those deceased and killed. And hopefully once we go live, that more people will get involved in this project and help us to clearly show and manage this project to world. That's all I have on that. I have a question for David Petrigu, and we discuss this daily almost. and we tried everything to build these monuments throughout Bosnia. We as victims, we're not just looking for monuments for us. We are looking for everybody who really was, tortured in this war. And we tried everything, but it looks like the politicians, local politicians in Bosnia, are not paying attention to this. So we have to put more pressure, or High Representative Schmidt, and obviously on the politicians in Sarajevo to pay more attention, because I feel they never talk about this subject. And like you said, there is a big memorial in I believe in Frankfurt, or Berlin actually, I think it's Frankfurt, to Jewish people across the US Embassy that was built in the heart of Germany. So I know it takes time to people to forget and forgive, but it's been 30 years. It's time to build these monuments throughout Bosnia and educate people and new generations so this doesn't happen to somebody. But I think we need to put the pressure to Schmidt and the politicians, and obviously it feels like all the time same people, a small number of people trying to accomplish this. So we need more support, more organizations and more politicians, and throughout USA and UN to really pay more attention to this subject from now on. So what can you suggest that, even though you are heavily involved with this, we could put the pressure on these politicians? I think, in my mind, I think we have to put more pressure on the politicians in Sarajevo.
Well, if I could respond to that, I would say that you also mentioned High Representative Schmidt, and I think that's the crucial focus. It should be the crucial focus of our appeal, because the Srebrenica Memorial Center, as a model, was created by four executive decisions using the bond powers by 3 high representatives. So it took time to establish the land, consolidate the buildings, and set up a board, and then pass the law. It was finally passed by Christian Schwartz Schilling. So, and I think in the intractable logjam, political logjam in Bosnia as a result of the Dayton Peace Accords, this is a kind of injustice that can only be addressed by the High Representative, who has the bond powers to make the decision. And I think you're right. I think I alluded to this idea that there's a important culture of remembrance in Germany, and education and remembrance. And so this was part of my intuition to try to appeal to the UN General Assembly, since in a sense, High Representative Schmidt reports to the UN Security Council. So I think that would be my thought would be to try to bring a new appeal to the UN General Assembly for a resolution that would be launched on May 31st, and hope that the resolution would go through this year and be part of public pressure on the High Representative to respond and create, a planning committee for both Omarska, Ternopilje, and other atrocity sites in Bosnia. The High Representative made a speech a few years ago at the Srebrenica commemoration. It was High Representative Insko. I think this was in 2018. When he said that the right to a proper burial is the oldest human right. And it seemed to me in the case where people's human remains have not yet been located or identified, that a memorial would be a crucial human right, the human right of memorialization that should be protected and implemented in Bosnia by the High Representative as soon as possible.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you, Mirsad. Jordan, I want to bring it back to you. So your book, And Still We Rise, sheds light on the brutalities of the camps in Prijedor. Now, I hope that you can explain to us why you decided that it was important to write about the concentration camps specifically, and how did you come to learn so intimately of what happened in these camps?
Yeah, you know, I grew up as a second generation Jewish American, certainly knowing about the Holocaust, knowing that I have family in Europe who perished in the Holocaust. And I grew up on Long Island in New York, and there was a large Jewish population and many refugees that had come over from Europe, either pre or post the Holocaust. So it's something I was very aware of. I was not aware of what happened in Bosnia, as I said earlier, and particularly when I heard about the concentration camps, because I started doing research about Prijedor and learned about the concentration camps. Frankly, I was blown away. And these concentration camps, I think in Germany, for the Nazis, the concentration camps were sort of this incredibly huge, almost an industrial complex to murder the 11 million total that were murdered. When I learned about the concentration camps, they seemed to me to be places of torture and rape and humiliation, and part of this plan that like I said, was just blown away. I could not imagine this was happening again. So I ended up reading a number of articles. I think one of the articles I remember reading was by a journalist named Mark Danner, and he wrote for PBS.org and wrote about Omar Scott, and it was very graphic. And then I read Reza Hukanovich's book, 10th Circle of Hell. I watched documentaries. I think it's called Killing Fields of Prijedor. There was documentaries, and watched interviews because I needed to learn more. Obviously, I had to do research, and sort of what evolved was I'm going to write a novel as a non-Serb, having my own experience sort of in my family and culturally in my religion. Also, I had been a social worker for a long time. I was able to apply and inform my sort of learning with having worked with people who had experienced trauma, not necessarily war trauma. I found an interview with Satko Mujagic. I think David mentioned him earlier. Satko lives in Brussels. He is an activist. He's very, like Mirso, very open about what happened to him in the camps. And he and I had Zoom conversations for many months. And he told me about his experiences, both as the invasion happened in Kozarac, where he's from, and his experiences in Omarskan and Manjača for nearly 7 months. He was also very instrumental in helping me. He would take my manuscript and would mark it up. And, at least for the parts about the first half of the book, mostly takes place, in the camps. And he would tell me, it couldn't have happened this way. Your timeline is off. You're demonizing all Serbs. Please don't do that. I mean, he was a very exacting man and very generous with his experiences. He said to me early on, if this book is not as authentic and genuine as it needs to be, I'm not going to, we won't continue the conversations. He ultimately wrote a foreword for the book. And he wrote, initially that he was skeptical about how a non-Serb, particularly, only just the previous few years had been learning about what happened, could do it. And ultimately, in the foreword, he wrote something like, "This is the best truth-based fiction about the camps in Prijedor ever written," which was quite an honor, for sure. So it was, that was really how I learned. And I have since spoken with survivors, including Mirso and I have spoken with other survivors of the camps, and continue to always learn, as I move forward in my journey to give voice to truth.
So Jordan, a follow-up to that, if you will, what universal lessons do you believe that Prijedor can teach people in the United States, people who maybe have never even been to Bosnia? And why is it important, in your opinion, to spread awareness of what happened in places like Prijedor?
You know, I think we share a very similar human experience, regardless of culture and religion, ethnicity. I think that's in some sense unimportant. We share a very common human experience. And I've learned from so many in Bosnia, in Prijedor, in really anywhere in Bosnia, that their lives were no different than ours. I mean, family celebrations, parties, playing soccer, sports, swimming, the ups and downs of life, work, school. We all share that. And I think we all seek to have happy and joyful lives for the most part, as best as we can. Certainly not everyone is able to find that, but mostly that's what we're all about. And then in Prijedor and elsewhere, that was disrupted, and the trust in neighbors was ended, because it was, for the most part, not all, but most Serb neighbors to Bosniaks and Catholic Croats bought into the propaganda, of Milosevic and Karadzic and their allies. And I think the lessons are, we are really, like I said, we share human experience together. We have to be really vigilant of hateful words and of the othering. You mentioned that in your introduction, of the othering. We see that here in this country. In Europe, there's a rise of the far right, as well as here. And I think the lessons are, we must be very, very vigilant to that. And I do worry that there are too many in this country, for example, and in Europe and elsewhere, that are buying into the us and them, which took place in Bosnia and in Prijedor. And it is, from people like David Pettigrew, from Mirso, from Satko, from you, from the Congress, from so many people who need to keep speaking out against that hate and speaking in support of memorialization and understanding and recognition of, how did we as human beings get into this, and what we need to do to not get into it again. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Pettigrew, some in our audience may not have closely followed the rulings of The Hague as they relate to Prijedor. So can you walk us through, maybe at a high level, the reasoning as to why Prijedor and other similar locations in Bosnia and Herzegovina were not ruled as genocide, while Srebrenica, for example, was?
Okay, thank you for this. It's a very difficult question that I'll try to address as briefly as possible. But when I say it's difficult, I would say that it's because the judgment of the tribunal of the chambers in these cases were inexplicable. The fact that the atrocities committed in the municipalities were not judged to be genocide was inexplicable and unforgivable. It was an error in analysis of the genocidal intent, and an error in fact. And the prosecution, I thought, did its job and made the case that, and there was a finding that a joint criminal enterprise was designed to permanently remove all non-Serbs from the Bosnian Serb claimed territory. In other words, there was this underlying eliminationist intent. And in the case of Prijedor, the prosecution made the case that the perpetrators deliberately inflicted conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group in whole or in part. And the Karadzic and Mladic judgments found that a series of heinous crimes were committed: murder, forcible displacement, inhumane treatment were committed. But in the end, they didn't find for genocide. And as I say, it's a error in law, error in fact, and in many ways inexplicable. Although I've spoken to prosecutors who indicate that there's sometimes they create sort of arbitrary numbers that say that the number of victims didn't rise to the level of genocide, although it would be hard to pin them down as to what the correct number would have been. Or they'll say the actual intent, the eliminations intent wasn't proven. And I challenged a prosecutor in the Lukic case because they did not convict the Lukic cousins of genocide in Visegrad. And his response was that they were lucky to get a conviction for crimes against humanity because the numbers of victims didn't rise to even the level of crimes against humanity. So they had these arbitrary numbers, which I think caused them to miss the overall eliminationist intent, while at the same time, finding that the group was indeed targeted, that persecution took place, that war crimes took place. But I think one, if you give me the opportunity to speculate, I think maybe one mistake that the prosecution made was to prosecute, one count for all the municipalities and one count for Srebrenica separately, that perhaps Prijedor should have been a separate count altogether and been focused on together. But this is something that the next generation of scholars can study to try to rectify such mistakes in the future. And I think that's an important consideration. I wanted to try to mention that I wanted to dedicate my remarks today to one of my students who's both her grandfathers, her uncles, and her father were all prisoners in Omarska and Manjača, and she bravely brought to class to share with the other students the identification cards they received in Manjača, and also a letter that her grandfather wrote to her mother, in which, and it was heartbreaking in its brevity, you might say. It was something very, very, very short, like the whole letter. Well, something like Dobro sam, Dobro sam, zdravo, something very, very brief. And you can imagine his daughter reading this on the other end. So I think that, I try to dedicate my work to support such children of survivors and my students who are studying this, and who will hopefully study these kinds of mistakes that were made. People don't like to criticize the ICTY because they're afraid that it would delegitimize, let's say, a genocide finding for Srebrenica. But I think that's not the case. I think that it's just the courts, chambers, members of the chambers are not perfect. And in the case of the Karadzic indictment in count one for the municipalities, remember that there was a decision made to remove 8 municipalities from the indictment in the interest of justice to expedite the proceedings. And you could imagine that the elimination of those all those municipalities from the indictment would have weakened the case, would have weakened the indictment, count one for genocide. So I think that the broader understanding of the clearly eliminationist intent of the founders of Republika Srpska indicates that there was genocidal intent, and also that I try to emphasize that if you study the comparative census data from 1991 and 2013, you can see that genocide took place in municipalities like Visegrad, Foča, and Kalinovic.
Thank you, Dr. Pettigrew. My next question is a question for all three of you. So we'll start with Mirsad and then Jordan, and then we'll lead to Dr. Pettigrew once again. We all know that the last step of genocide is denial, and each of you, through your individual work, have done so much to combat this denial as it relates to genocide in Bosnia. So will each of you tell us a little bit about how we and our audience can work to do the same and why it is so vital for us to do so?
I guess I'm next, yeah. So in my perspective, we have done so much together trying to speak the truth and fight those denials. But like David said, when you are denying, you are actually allowing crime to happen again. So the way to still fight for our rights and make sure this denial does not happen, we do have to have a strong voice and always be brave and not be afraid to speak up for your rights. But unfortunately, in Bosnia, there are so many denials. But with this INSCO's law, things are getting different, and hopefully this continue, and hopefully we will get to our goal, which is stop this denial, build these monuments, get the rights for all these victims, and build the better generations in Bosnia, and so going. That's my simple approach. Even though, like I said, sometimes doing this almost for the last 15 years, feel like all the same audience is listening, not much is happening. These words never again, like President Zelensky said, those are just the words, because that's happening. But we still have to hope. What I learned in this camp, that people are our biggest animals. They become animals in the name religion, or when they give them power, and especially wrong people in the wrong time. But I still believe in people. I still believe with the people, with the good people around you, with the family. That's how I overcame this pain and turned my life around. And we still have to hope in the better future and in the people.
Okay, my turn. Thank you, Mirso. So I think through education and awareness, the working group is an example. This panel certainly today is an example. All the books that are written both by those who experienced this and non-Bosnians and just allies like me. And I think that that's very important to keep it front and center. Because as I said, a quick story, when my wife's her family emigrated from Italy in the early 60s, and I'd go back, and then they immigrated to Utica, New York. I'd go there on a pretty regular basis. We've been together a long time. And in the 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, and early 2000s, there were many Bosnian refugees that has a fairly large, nothing like Chicago, but a fairly large community, Bosnian community. And I really, like I said, didn't know why these folks were going to Utica. It's a very strong and active community. I am sure, because my relatives, my wife's family, were not sure why they were coming to Utica. They just knew they were there, and they'd say these are good, hardworking people contributing to the community, etc. But I think what I have learned in my journey, as Mirso so well represents, is people who experience this want to be heard. They want the truth told. I've spoken to numerous survivors who have thanked me for telling their stories. So I think that awareness and education is very important. Also in Ukraine, we're seeing what's going on now, making the connection between, and many have made the connection, or are re-traumatized by seeing what's going on in Ukraine. It's a very similar playbook, starting with the propaganda, the denial, sort of the state-run TV from Putin and his allies. It's happening again. So making the connection between what's happening in Ukraine and what happened in Bosnia and elsewhere is an important thread to make, so we understand and always keep the memories alive and those lessons alive. One last thing, I'm working on a third book where I've interviewed a number of survivors. and you three are, prominently in the book. That is what I mean by continuing to tell the stories and ensuring that people understand and never forget what happened in Bosnia. Thank you.
Well, if I can try to add to that, I would encourage anyone who will be listening to this program to reach out and try to connect with organizations like Congress of Bosniaks of North America, Bosnian American Genocide Institute in Chicago, Advisory Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina in Washington, D.C., the working group for Bosnia that Jordan has mentioned. I think that there's a growing network and mobilization of the diaspora that was evident in actions surrounding January 9th, for example, that were very, very important. So I think that the network exists, and we just encourage people to get involved and to learn more. We didn't talk today about some of the major camps in Herzegovina, for example, that also Kostana camp, where they've tried to establish a memorial unsuccessfully. Lubushki, Dretel, I'm not remembering them all, but there's we need to keep learning ourselves, raise awareness, and continue to work for the truth. I would say that I don't know how much advice I can give, because I'm the one who's been inspired by young people like Mirsad, who went through these things and himself kept his heart open to the hope that telling the truth about the genocide would lead to justice. And so I'm just doing the best I can to support that process and encourage others to get involved as well.
Thank you. And with that, we are at the end of our program today. We encourage each of our audience members to continue learning and educating others about the atrocities that took place in Prijedor and throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina. I want to thank you, our panelists, for sharing your stories with us today. You can learn more about their work by visiting our event page. Thank you all for watching and supporting the work of the Congress of Bosniaks of North America. Our collective fight for justice and truth continues. Thank you.